Louisiana's Attorney General announced today that no criminal charges will be filed in the 2016 death of Alton Sterling, who was shot and killed as he was held down on the ground by police in Baton Rouge. Back in May, federal prosecutors announced they would not file any civil rights charges, noting that Sterling had previously failed to follow officers' orders and that the video shot by two bystanders could not definitively prove or disprove the officers' claim that Sterling was reaching for a gun. But for Sterling's family, today's announcement fell far short of justice.
He's gone. There's no more coming back. So there's not no amount of money on this earth, in this world, that can give those kids back to their father. They took a human away. They took a father away. Yes, the system has failed us.
And she's right. According to one study, black men are almost 3 times as likely to be killed by police as white men. And police shoot and kill approximately 1,000 people a year. But between 2005 and 2017, just 80 officers were arrested for murder or manslaughter, and only 35% of them were convicted. Statistics that do not bode well for justice in the case of Stephon Clark either. He's the 22-year-old man who was standing in his grandmother's backyard in Sacramento 2 Sundays ago when he was shot by police 20 times after they mistook the phone in his hand for a gun, a scene his grandmother recounted yesterday in heartbreaking detail.
They didn't have to kill him like that. They didn't have to shoot him that many times. Why did you just shoot him in the arm, shoot him in the leg, send a dog, send a taser? Why? Why? Y'all didn't have to do that. Y'all didn't have to over a cell phone. I just want justice for my grandson.
In the days since Clark's killing, crowds have protested on the streets of Sacramento, but many argue his death has not gotten nearly as much attention as others did when the nation was much more focused on the Black Lives Matter movement. Joining me are Peter Roby, former athletic director at Northeastern University. Good to see you, Peter.
Thank you, Jim.
Tanisha Sullivan is president of the Boston branch of the NAACP. Same to you, Tanisha. And Jocelyn Sargent is executive director at the Hyams Foundation, which just released a study on racial inequity in Boston. It's good to meet you, Jocelyn. Thanks for being here. We all know the name Stephon Clark. Anybody know who Danny Ray Thomas is here? He was an unarmed black man killed in Houston 2 days after Stephon Clark, pants at his ankles, supposedly mentally ill. The reason I bring that up is on the radio today, we were talking to Wesley Lowery, who's chronicled for the Washington Post police killings around this country. His contention is that we give much less attention, we as a people, we as a media, to the killing of black men by police officers than we did as recently as a year ago. Do you buy it? And if you do, Peter, why do you think that is?
Well, you know, my concern is that maybe they're happening too often, so they don't get the coverage that they should because it's become too routine. I mean, I think that's the fear, certainly within the black community, is that it's become too routine, and it's unacceptable, inexcusable.
He says, in part, while the rate is the same, he would probably agree, Wesley, that it was getting sort of old for people, that the media can only focus on so many things, and it's all Trump all the time, so there's no room to talk about black men gunned down by cops. You buy that?
There always has to be room to talk about lives and our basic humanity.
So why don't we make the room?
I think part of it goes to what Peter just mentioned. The reality is that when it comes to the lives of black men, black women, brown women dying in our streets, it has become on some level normalized, or at least there's a push for it to become normalized. What we have to do as a community is make sure that it doesn't become our normal. This should be shocking every day.
You know, it's shocking to some, Jocelyn. The statistics only get you so far. They're dry. Benjamin Crump, who most of us know representing Trayvon Martin, the family of Trayvon Martin, and a whole bunch of Michael Brown, a whole bunch of Tamir Rice, represents the family of Stephon Clark. And he had something interesting to say just yesterday. Here's Ben Crump.
Young man who were bombing homes in Austin, Texas. The police followed him for hours. He wasn't shot once, but an unarmed black man holding a cell phone is shot 20 times.
Can you make a case that this is anything but racism in America? Is there any other case to be made for these disparities?
I don't see any other explanation to the differential experiences that communities of color are facing from policing and from the system that's supposed to protect them. So I feel like this is one of the things that, you know, Black people are seeing every day, and it's become normalized, unfortunately, for us as Peter.
I wonder what the acculturation process is with officers. Well, like, what kind of education do they get as part of their training with respect to the appreciation of difference and the cultures that they're going to end up supposedly
well, you know, it's
protecting?
not just white officers shooting black men, by the way.
No, but it's about the communities that they're policing in, and what kind of reference point do they have? What kind of context do they have? If you go into situations where you're always fearful, or you have an expectation that people are going to be violent, or that they don't like the police, then you're going to be on a certain edge that may, you know, supersede your training.
You know, speaking of culture, one of the most shocking things to me that I think has been painfully underplayed was the unanimous decision by the Supreme Judicial Court, our state's highest court, a year and a half ago. Let me just read one line. The notion was a case was being made that historically, if somebody runs away from the cops, you can assume, at least infer, that they're guilty. At least that's part of the thing. Here's what the opinion, part of Geraldine Hines, the unanimous opinion. The finding that black males in Boston are disproportionately and repeatedly targeted for field interrogation and observation encounters suggests a reason for flight totally unrelated to consciousness of guilt. She goes on to say, it's reasonable for a black man to be scared of the cops. Is that just the new normal? I mean, that is...
No, I refuse to accept that as the new normal. It is the reality for black and brown folks on the streets of Boston in particular. I think in addition to what Peter mentioned about training, I also think it's important to look at systemically what's happening within law enforcement. Look,
like what does that mean?
Meaning, we know that being a police officer is one of the toughest jobs that one can have, right? And we're greatly appreciative of their work. However, there are policies in place with respect to use of force policies, right, that in some respects do not push law enforcement to think more about who it is they're interacting with. The use of force policies that allow officers to shoot to kill, unfortunately, land us with the situations like we have with Stephon Clark.
You know, you did just did some polling, and I want to just pull, you at the Hyams Foundation, pull up something that's dramatic but not shocking. How would you say the Boston Police Department treats black and Latino residents? Blacks, 53% say unfairly, white, only 30% unfairly. This is with a commissioner, and we interview him monthly on the radio, Commissioner Evans, who is almost laser-like focused on the issue of race and racial disparities, yet there is this divide that is colossal. What do you take away from that, Jocelyn?
Well, I feel that you can see those disparities in the degree to which those communities feel more or less protected. So white Americans that we polled, they feel much more protected, and they feel safer in their communities than African Americans do. And I think that speaks to whether or not the system is really being responsive to the needs.
So what do we do? You heard a little bit of a couple of suggestions here. Do you draw any conclusions from your research as to what one does? I mean, we also saw in that painful, I think, 7-part series in the Globe that blacks saw Boston as the least welcoming city in America of the 8 major cities, I think. What's part of the solution here? I
think part of the solution was identified by some of the respondents to the survey, and they include the kinds of practices that keep people out of jail, that divert youth diversion programs, programs that support education and training within the system, and when people rejoin the community, incarcerated people rejoin the community.
You know, do athletes, I mean, that's your life has been sport and society and this. I was so moved by this PSA that the Celtics did with the Sacramento Kings players talking about Stephon Clark and race. Is that help, or is that just, is that like a one and done kind of?
No, it absolutely helps because it shows the example of what can be when people are empathetic, when people are willing to drop the stereotype and see people for who they are. You know, Brad Stevens is the white coach of the Boston Celtics. He comes in contact with African-American men on a daily basis, and he has great respect for them. So his interactions with them are totally different than it might be if he had a stereotypical view of what he thought a black man was supposed to be, and his head was filled with certain things. And so that's why education is so important. That's why leveling the playing field so people can have the kinds of jobs and careers that would allow people to look at them respectfully and see them as a colleague, as a peer, as opposed to maybe how they think of African American males in this society.
I agree with
I'm sorry.
I just want to add, I agree with that. And I think some of what you've seen, not only with the Celtics and the Sacramento Kings this past week, even the Players Association through the NFL, but also here in Boston with the Take the Lead initiative that all of our sports teams participated in. And that was really them all saying, you know, as sports professionals, we recognize that the unique role we can play when it comes to these types of conversations.
Can I raise one last thing? I had 3 young kids here last night, an African-American kid, a Latino kid, and a white kid who were leaders and organizers of March for Our Lives. And when I went home last night, I totally bought it in the notion that their effort to bring diversity into their ranks, when we saw Martin Luther King's granddaughter and Naomi Wadler and all these people this march, Alex King from Chicago, was huge. But then a lot of people were saying to me today, no, that takes attention away from Black Lives Matter. Yeah, they're dealing with handgun violence, but not with this. You're all shaking your head. Quickly, if I can get online. Did March for Our Lives help this cause or not?
Absolutely.
Quickly, if you can,
absolutely. Any time that we have the opportunity to join together and coalesce around an issue such as gun violence or race, that is a good thing. This is not about one particular group being impacted. It is about all of us being impacted.
This isn't a black issue. This is a societal issue. And the society is going to come up with the solutions for it. And everybody, whether they're impacted particularly or not, has to be a part of the solution.
Do you make that unanimous?
I do. I think that's what's exciting to me, that young people as well as athletes and other private business people, as well as the nonprofits that have been fighting this issue forever. I think that it's great. We all are going to have a role in solving this challenge of our nation. You know, it's deeply entrenched.
Thank you, Peter. It's good to see you as always. Tanisha, you as well. And Jocelyn,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much
Nice
for
to
your
meet
time.
you.
I appreciate it.